I want you to picture the skyline of a major city. New York, Shanghai, Dubai, wherever. What are you actually seeing?
Steel. Glass.
Right, steel, massive cranes. You are basically seeing this massive fight against gravity. We tend to define human achievement by how high we can build, right? We scrape the
We
clouds.
do. We always equate up with progress.
Exactly. But I've been reading a paper this week that suggests this entire impulse, this whole drive to build up,
Mm,
might actually be a fundamental error.
it's a really provocative thought. The source material we're digging into for today's deep dive suggests that our obsession with the surface is actually a trap.
It really is a trap, and it completely challenges the safety of what we consider, normal housing.
Right.
The paper is titled Infinite Fractal Descent, a Framework for Subterranean Monolithic Habitats.
By Incom Galan Nesenjarga.
Yes, and it was published just a few days ago, on February 24th, 2026. And the premise is, well, it's disturbing at first, but honestly incredibly compelling once you get into the math.
It really is. Nesenjargal is proposing something called the inverted monolith. Instead of a skyscraper, I want you to imagine a structure that goes 500 meters down straight into the crust.
But this isn't a bunker.
No, not at all. And it's not a basement. It's an engineering marvel designed to solve urban housing density, survive magnitude 9.0 earthquakes, and here is the crazy part, last for 5,000 years.
5,000 years. I want to put a pin in that number because, it sounds impossible. We build things today that barely last 50 years before they needed a totally new roof.
Right.
But before we get to the solution, let's talk about the problem. Why is building up such a bad idea, according to this author? We've been doing it for centuries, and it seems to work fine.
Well, it works, but at a tremendous hidden cost. Nesenjargal calls this the topological crisis. The core argument here is about surface bias.
Surface bias.
Right. When we build a skyscraper, we're essentially placing a foreign object directly on the Earth. We treat the planet like a platform, like a flat table to just put our toys on.
Okay, sure, but why is that a crisis?
Because the surface of a planet is actually the most volatile place you can possibly be. The paper refers to it as the zone of maximal atmospheric entropy.
I love that phrase.
It perfectly describes it. Think about what a building has to endure every single day. Thermal fluctuations, expanding in the heat, contracting in the cold.
Oxidation from oxygen.
Exactly. Rain, wind shear, UV radiation.
So it's constantly under attack.
The atmosphere is actively trying to dismantle the building from the second the concrete sets. That is why we have this massive hidden energy cost in modern architecture.
Because we usually think of energy efficiency as, how much does it cost to heat the inside of the building?
Right, we forget the energy cost of just keeping the building standing. Painting, re-roofing, fighting rust, fighting gravity. It is a completely losing battle against entropy.
So the topological crisis is basically saying that by living on the surface, we are choosing to live in this active war zone between the planet and the sky.
That is a perfect way to put it. And the shift this paper proposes is to simply stop fighting.
Stop projecting mass up.
Yes. Instead of projecting mass up into a hostile atmosphere, we project a recursive route down into the lithosphere. We use the Earth's pressure as a stabilizing force.
The recursive route. I do like that image, but I have to be the skeptic here for a second. When you say building down, I don't picture a nice organic route. I picture a tomb.
A dark, damp basement.
Exactly. A damp concrete tube that feels incredibly claustrophobic. And honestly, I picture it collapsing. If you dig a hole 500 meters deep, the pressure from the surrounding rock must be immense. How does this thing not just crush itself?
That is the intuitive fear. And honestly, it would be true if we were building the way we build right now. If you just dug a massive cylinder and lined it with concrete, it would absolutely implode under the lithostatic pressure.
But Nesenjargal isn't proposing a cylinder.
No. This is where the infinite fractal descent comes in. The IFD.
This is the geometry part of the paper, which was fascinating.
Right. The structure entirely relies on branching logic. Think of a tree root system again. A tree doesn't shove a solid block of wood straight into the ground.
It sends out a network.
Exactly. Roots that branch smaller and smaller. This distributes the tension naturally. The inverted monolith uses a very similar fractal geometry.
So it is not one big hole.
It's a lattice of habitable spaces. The paper describes a scaling law of descent. As you go deeper, the structural nodes, the connection points, are distributed logarithmically.
Meaning they get closer and closer together the deeper you go to handle the increasing weight.
Exactly. The geometry tightens to match the pressure. The math ensures that the pressure at the singularity core,
Which is the very bottom.
right, the bottom at 500 meters down, The pressure there never actually exceeds the material's limit. It is literally mimicking how nature handles physical stress.
Okay, so the shape clearly helps, but the paper dives into some really heavy math here to actually prove the stability. I saw the term renormalization group flows, or RG flows.
Yeah.
Now, be honest, is this just dense physics jargon, or does it actually mean something practical for the person living down there?
It's definitely not just jargon, though it is very dense physics. Think of it this way. Imagine you're looking at a coastline on a map.
Okay.
From space, it looks completely smooth. But if you zoom in, it's jagged. If you zoom in further to the individual pebbles on the beach,
Yeah.
it's rough all over again.
Right.
Renormalization is a mathematical tool used to understand how systems change depending on the scale you look at them.
Okay, I'm with you so far. How does that apply to an underground building?
Well, geological rock pressure is chaotic. It's noisy in a physical sense. The RG flow equations allow the engineers to design the structure so that it mathematically smooths out that chaos.
It regulates what the paper calls curvature tension.
Exactly. Basically, the math proves that the building can reach something called a coherence attractor.
A coherence attractor.
It's a state of pure stability. I mean, the building isn't actively fighting the rock pressure. It has mathematically tuned itself to match the rock pressure. It becomes totally transparent to the geological stress.
So instead of a dam holding back billions of gallons of water, it's more like water flowing into water.
Close. It's like noise-canceling headphones for gravity. The structure creates a counter-geometry that completely neutralizes the noise of the crushing depth.
That is actually incredibly cool if the math holds up in reality. But let's talk about the physical stuff for a minute. You can have the best math in the world, but if you pour standard sidewalk cement 500 meters down, it is going to crack. What is this thing actually made of?
They call it graphene-reinforced self-consolidating monolith, or SEM. It's a concrete composite, but it's doped with a microscopic graphene lattice.
Stronger than steel,
It's
obviously.
vastly stronger. But the sheer strength isn't even the most interesting part of the material. It's the fractal porosity. The paper says the walls are configured like a Menger sponge.
I remember that from the reading. A Menger sponge is a shape with infinite surface area and zero volume.
Conceptually, at least.
Right, mathematically.
But in the real world, it basically means the walls are full of tiny, tiny holes. Trillions of them. And this reduces the actual physical material needed by 40%, which is obviously great for the construction budget. But here's the thing that really blew my mind. Knudsen diffusion.
Yes. I highlighted this exact section because the concept is so wild. The paper claims these walls can filter air without any machines.
Correct. Imagine a normal hallway full of people. Those people are air molecules. They are bumping into each other constantly, moving chaotically down the hall. That is normal airflow.
Makes sense.
But now imagine that hallway gets really, really narrow. So narrow that the people are bumping into the walls more often than they bump into each other.
Okay.
That is Knudsen diffusion. The pores in this SEM material are so microscopic that gas molecules hit the wall surface more often than they hit other gas molecules.
And that changes how the gas flows.
Entirely. It creates a completely passive filtration system.
Because the wall itself physically determines what passes through based on the size of the molecule.
Exactly. It naturally regulates moisture and airflow. It physically filters out particulates. You are 500 meters underground, but the air isn't stale or damp at all.
The walls are essentially breathing for you.
Yes, regulating the atmosphere purely through physics, with zero moving parts. No fans, no massive HVAC systems, no HEPA filters to change out every 6 months.
That definitely addresses the damp basement fear I had earlier, so you have fresh, clean air. But what about the tomb aspect? Because the paper mentions a process called mineralization.
This is where they play the long game. Over decades, chemical ions from the surrounding soil slowly migrate into the SCM matrix.
The building material is specifically designed to accept these local ions.
Exactly. It absorbs them.
So it's absorbing the rock.
It is becoming the rock,
Okay.
literally petrifies.
Yeah.
This is exactly how they justify that 5,000-year lifespan we pinned earlier. A modern concrete building degrades because it stays distinct from its environment.
It's always a foreign object.
Right. But this inverted monolith fuses completely with the local lithology. Over time, it stops being a building and starts being a geological inclusion.
Which is fantastic for longevity, but I really have to wonder if it turns into solid rock, does it become brittle? What if I want to renovate? It sounds incredibly permanent.
It is permanent infrastructure.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental trade-off of this system. You aren't remodeling the kitchen by knocking down a wall in a fractal monolith.
Right.
You are living inside a synthetic saucil. You adapt to it, not the other way around.
Let's move to the construction phase. Because digging a hole this complex seems way harder than just building a skyscraper. The paper talks about an inverted pour and using a negative earth mold.
This is where they completely flip the logistics of construction. In a normal building, you build a wooden or steel frame and you pour concrete into it.
Sure.
Here, the earth itself is the frame.
So they don't dig a massive crater and then build the walls inside it.
No. They use robotic boring units called steering cubes to carve out the negative space of the structure first.
Just carving the actual shape of the walls into the solid rock.
Yes. These robots use real-time 3D seismic processing to look ahead as they dig, avoiding active faults or patches of unstable rock. They carve out this massive, intricate tunnel network.
And then they just pump the concrete into those tunnels.
They do. But this is the detail that really stopped me in my tracks. Step 2 of the pour. The universal tick.
The universal tick, it sounds right out of a sci-fi thriller.
I know, but it's an absolute engineering necessity. When you are pouring a structure that is 500 meters tall or deep, you cannot have any cold joints.
A cold joint is when one layer of concrete dries before the next one is poured on top, right?
Exactly. And it creates a massive weak point. For this to work, the entire 500-meter fractal structure needs to cure as one single, continuous, solid object.
So how on earth do they do that?
They pulse the concrete pour. They strictly synchronize the flow of the liquid material to match the ambient seismic signature of the Earth.
Wait, hold on. The Earth has a signature?
Yes. The Earth is always vibrating. There are deep, low-frequency hums from tectonic movement, ocean tides, even atmospheric pressure changes.
But isn't that totally inconsistent? Like, what if a heavy truck drives by on the surface or there is construction nearby? Wouldn't that mess up the tick?
That is just surface noise.
Yeah.
The steering cube sensors filter all of that out. They are locking onto the deep, resonant frequencies of the continental crust, the actual background hum of the planet.
Wow.
By pulsing the liquid concrete at that exact planetary rhythm, they align the molecular structure as it cures. It basically vibrates the mixture into a perfect, joint-free fit.
So the building is literally born from the rhythm of the Earth.
It's almost poetic, isn't it? And once that entire skeleton cures and becomes rock hard, they move to step 3, which is core evacuation.
Right, because right now it's just solid concrete veins inside solid dirt.
Exactly. They have to go back in and dig out all the dirt from the inside of the tunnels to finally create the actual living spaces, the recursive voids.
It is ingenious. You build the walls and then you dig the hole. But now I have to bring up the Titanic scenario. We have heard the words unsinkable and indestructible before.
We have.
And nature usually finds a very quick way to humble us. If I am living 500 meters down and a magnitude 9.0 earthquake hits, I don't really care how good your math is, the ground is moving violently, am I not just going to be crushed instantly?
This is the biggest psychological hurdle for anyone reading this. But the paper argues that our fear comes directly from our experience on the surface.
What do you mean?
On the surface, earthquakes interact with buildings like a wave hitting a cliff. The rigid cliff takes the full, blunt force of the wave.
Then it cracks.
Right. But underground, completely encased in a structure like this, the interaction is entirely different. It relies on topological synchronization. Remember those fractal branches we talked about?
The root system.
Exactly. Those branches act as low-pass filters. When a high-frequency seismic wave hits the kind of snapping, violent motion that destroys surface houses, the fractal geometry diffuses it.
Because it's not a flat surface.
Exactly. The wave doesn't find a flat wall to push against. It gets broken up into a million tiny vibrations that just safely travel through the lattice.
So the building is fluid, in a structural sense.
In a way, yes. It lets the wave pass through it rather than resisting it. The paper claims resilience against magnitude 9.0 plus, simply because the building moves with the geology, not against it.
I suppose that makes physical sense. If you are part of the rock, you move when the rock moves. You aren't fighting the movement, you're riding it.
Precisely.
But let's say something does actually go wrong, a microfracture. An unexpected shift in the deep water table. You are half a kilometer down. You can't exactly walk around the perimeter of the house to check the foundation for cracks. How do we even know if the roof is about to cave in?
That is where the possessed PQF engine comes into play. That's the primary monitoring system.
The possessed PQF, another great name from this paper. How does that engine work?
It uses something called sheaf theory.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's a mathematical concept for gluing local data into a global picture. Imagine your own body for a second. You've nerve endings in your toe, your fingers, your stomach.
Sure, if I stub my toe, I know about it immediately.
Right, you don't have to visually look at your toe to know it's hurt. Your central nervous system naturally integrates that local pain signal into your global awareness.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The Possess PQF engine does the exact same thing for the Monolith. It has microscopic sensors embedded at every single structural node.
So millions of sensors.
Millions. And it constantly glues that local data together in real time. If there's a microscopic rise in topological tension structural stress anywhere in the lattice, the system knows instantly. It detects what it calls informational asymmetries.
So the building effectively feels pain.
In a purely cybernetic sense, yes.
Yeah.
It treats the entire concrete structure as a living sensory membrane. It's not just a dumb rock, it's an incredibly smart rock. It can tell the engineers, hey, node 4000 at depth 300 is experiencing 2% more shear stress than we predicted.
That does make me feel a lot safer. It's not just sitting there blindly waiting to fail. It is actively reporting its own health.
And because the system is so granular, it can accurately predict failures long before they ever happen. It completely turns building maintenance from a reactive guessing game into a precise, predictive science.
So we have a building that breathes through Knudsen diffusion, heals or at least fossilizes over time, and has a central nervous system.
It also creates its own geothermal climate, by the way. Passive geothermal diffusion cuts energy bills by 90%.
It sounds like an absolute utopia. But let's zoom out a bit to the Greenlithic revolution the author mentions at the end. What actually happens if we do this, if we move all of humanity underground?
It changes everything. The paper sharply contrasts temporary shelter, which is our current 50-year building cycle, with permanent infrastructure. If we fully move into the crust, the surface of the Earth is liberated.
We give the planet back.
We stop paving over vital topsoil. We stop fighting the weather. We let the forests and the plains recover. We essentially return the surface to the natural biosphere.
It sounds wonderful for the ecology of the planet. But I keep coming back to the human element. Can we actually handle it? Psychologically, we evolved running around under the sun. Can we really be happy living in a geological inclusion, no matter how physically safe and comfortable it is?
That is the big open question. The paper focuses entirely on the engineering, which appears deeply sound. But the anthropology of it all, that is totally uncharted territory. We would be trading the expansive view of the horizon for the absolute security of the deep.
It feels like a fundamental shift in what it means to be a human being. We
Yeah.
have always been explorers and conquerors of the surface. This turns us into residents of the interior.
It really does. And that brings us to the final thought we wanted to leave you with today. We were chatting about this before we started recording, the idea of the recursive universe that's briefly referenced in the source.
Right. The theoretical physics idea that systems tend to loop back on themselves at different scales.
Consider this. We build a home that synchronizes perfectly with the Earth's seismic heartbeat during its construction. It passively mineralizes and becomes an actual part of the geology. And it has a cybernetic nervous system that constantly senses the stress of the rock.
When you lay it out like that, it sounds a lot less like we are building a house and a lot more like we are evolving into the planet itself.
Exactly. If we are living deep inside the rock, sensing the rock's movements, regulated entirely by the rock's ambient temperature, at what point do we stop being distinct inhabitants on the planet and start functioning as a coherent, integrated part of the planet itself?
Are we just building a resilient home, or are we literally building a planetary nervous system that we just happen to live inside of?
It completely blurs the line between biology, geology, and architecture. And frankly, I am not sure humanity is ready for the answer to that question.
A very heavy thought for a very heavy topic.
Yeah.
Next time you are stuck in surface traffic, staring up at a massive glass skyscraper and dodging weather and potholes, just remember, there might actually be a much better way to live. But it is going to require a very big shovel. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you, or perhaps sense your local data on the next one.